Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Anthropuzzled podcast. I'm your host, Abby Letzinger, and every 2 weeks we'll explore how anthropologists are forging unique career paths beyond the usual academic sphere. Tune in, get inspired, and start piecing together your own career puzzle within the world of anthropology. On today's episode, we have Carrie Perkins. She graduated from Southern Methodist University with a PhD in anthropology and from the University of North Texas with a master's in applied anthropology. She spent the previous 2 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of California, Irvine, and is currently a visiting professor at Saga University of America. How are you doing today, Carrie?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Abby.
So what exactly is a visiting assistant professor, and how is it different from all the other professor titles?
Sure. So a visiting assistant professor is basically a fixed term appointment in that you have a set number of years at an institution rather than a permanent tenure track position. But it's a little bit different than adjuncting because as a visiting assistant professor, you're generally expected to perform a wider range of duties like research, sometimes additional teaching responsibilities. Sometimes you'll mentor like capstone students. Or something along those lines. So yeah, that's generally the difference between the two.
Okay. And what kind of education track does one have to become a professor? Do they need their PhD?
Generally, yes, especially if you want to get on the tenure track or if that's sort of what you want to make your career field, you will need a PhD. There are some adjunct positions or more entry-level positions that sometimes only a master's degree might be required. But definitely if you want to make academia your career, a PhD is the route to go.
Gotcha. Because I've heard some, depending on what university you teach at, some community colleges, you only need a master's degree. But PhD is definitely like the preferred that I've seen with general professors.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some positions that you can be hired for as a master's, but the academic job market in general is incredibly competitive. And so usually having that PhD will help secure that position.
Okay. And how does one go about applying for a professor position?
Yeah, definitely. So the academic job market is entirely a different sort of beast than applying for jobs in the private sector or the nonprofit sector. And that's mainly because the academic job market generally hires almost a year out. So you hire the year, or you go through the interview process almost an entire year before you would actually start teaching at an institution. So we're speaking right now in October, which is kind of prime season for the academic job market. Jobs usually get posted around August, September, October, and those jobs will be starting in August the following year. Generally sometimes August or September. And so that process, you usually look to your discipline's specific job board and you see what's being posted in your area of specialization. And because there are a limited number of academic jobs posted, as I mentioned, it gets incredibly competitive. People often start looking outside of the state where they went to grad school or where they currently reside, and try to find options that will align with their career goals and special interests. And that might be at a university across the country, sometimes in another country. And it becomes a little bit more complicated if you have a spouse or a partner at home that also is in academia because your interests might be at, universities on opposite ends of the country.
Yeah, no, that can definitely be very hard. And what is the pay like for professors? Does it depend on how much research you're doing or how much you're teaching?
Yeah, great question. So the pay is often contingent on your geographic location, like a lot of places. Sometimes other factors come into play. So I'm in California. I was previously at University of California, Irvine, where I had a position as an academic researcher, a postdoctoral research fellowship. And that position, along with graduate students, had the opportunity to be involved in a union, which often directly impacts the amount of pay that you'll receive. But the pay, as I said, can be contingent on what the cost of living is in the area. Usually for entry-level positions where you're just starting out as assistant professor or visiting professor, there's usually going to range somewhere between $60,000 to $100,000, depending on, where that university is located. And then after that, you will go up in incremental steps. If you're on the tenure track, raises in pay are usually tied to promotion. If you are promoted to associate professor, there's an increase in pay related to that as well. There are opportunities sometimes, depending on what job you secure, where you might have extra funds that you can receive in the summer to conduct research. Sometimes there's extra bonuses. For example, if you're supervising multiple projects, capstone projects for students, there might be an incentive to do that where you'll get some extra pay. Or if you teach an extra course in the summer, you might get extra pay for that. So there's some options sometimes to supplement that standard base salary, but it's very much contingent on the employer and the university.
Okay. And as a visiting professor, do you get to do a lot of research?
Yeah, there are absolutely some opportunities for me to do research, which I'm excited about. I'm actually going to be teaching a learning cluster, which is a short 3-week course over our winter break. And this is actually an opportunity to really start to kind of explore some of the areas that I'm interested in research-wise, and to develop a course related to my research interests that can, sort of act like a springboard to potential projects.
So tell us a little bit about what your research interests are.
Sure. Yeah. So I have been really interested in multimodal ethnography of late. The past 2 years that I spent as a postdoc at UC Irvine, I was working on a project related to virtual reality. And so my current research is thinking about using virtual reality and technology in a different way, thinking about how we can integrate that into ethnographic practice. And so my current research is looking at, I work with migrants and refugees primarily, but thinking about how I can create platforms for people to tell their own stories, and platforms that become immersive and help create a really embodied experience for people that goes beyond traditional forms of academic storytelling.
Okay. And what exactly is multimodal ethnography? What does that mean?
Generally, it's kind of a term that's popped up in recent years, and I hope it's not too buzzwordy, but essentially it means that you're combining different types of media to create new ways of thinking about representation and dissemination of our ethnographic work. So it can include methodology that uses photography or video or different audio experiences. A lot of people think about the ambient sound when you're in a field site and how that sound creates embodied experience. It can be, thinking about other forms of digital media. And then, of course, as I mentioned, I am interested in virtual reality specifically as a medium, and thinking about how these new and sort of emerging technologies can combine to tell new stories. So I was just speaking with a student earlier today about a mapping project using GIS and using LiDAR to create these sort of storyboards about what was happening in a community. So kind of adding this social component into a more kind of empirical study that's looking at geographic boundaries. And to me, I find that really exciting.
So that actually kind of reminds me of a documentary that I watched not too long ago, and it's called Lost Cities by Albert Lind. And they use a lot of GIS and LiDAR to try and find these ancient civilizations by stripping away the vegetation on top so that they can find the leftover structures. And from that, they're actually able to build up digital maps of what these cities would have looked like thousands of years ago. And what's super cool is Albert Lind isn't actually an anthropologist. I think he's more of like a electrical engineer, but what they do with this kind of technology is super cool. Is that kind of stuff that they use in museums, like exhibit wise?
It definitely can be. There's been some really interesting and exciting developments, especially in archaeological field work, where a lot of times I know I have some colleagues that work in Belize and kind of on the Belize-Guatemalan border, and there's very heavy tree canopy in that area. And so it's really difficult to do on the ground surveys looking for various sites, but doing this above ground scanning can add another lens to look at that topography and to identify different, ancient roadways and different structures. And it's just another way of sort of directing anthropological inquiry, but kind of working hand in hand with technology to kind of fill out this bigger, more holistic picture, which is really interesting. But yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. I think in museums, we can kind of combine those two pieces, the technology and then what people kind of go and they call it, ground truthing, and how that has created this very interactive and interesting way for us to discover the past.
There's a game on VR where you can go to Machu Picchu and you're kind of just walking around and it's having you like take little pictures and learn a little bit about Machu Picchu. So is that kind of with the art of exile, you were saying it allows you to get into the lives of these individuals, like their culture and their material culture and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I created the Art of Exile, essentially what it is it's an art gallery, and I was working with refugees from Myanmar, from three different regions. One group was on the Thai-Myanmar border. One group is in a refugee camp in Bangladesh. It's the Rohingya population. And then I was working with Chin, which are an ethnic minority from Myanmar, both internally displaced and then across the border into Mizoram. And working with these refugees that were creating art in camps, I traveled to the camp and took photos of some of the paintings that they had created. And then some of the artists I was working with were photographers, and they were able to send me images that they took in camp. But what I was also able to do was take 360 scans inside the refugee camp and then also inside an art studio where one artist was creating art inside the camp. And so when I created the Art of Exile in VR, it was an experience where you could walk into an art gallery, just like you would in any major institution. And as you walk through the space, you see the paintings and you see the photographs, and you can place your hand on them, and then you can hear audio from the interview. The person who made the painting or took the photo talk to you about it and the background. And then in some instances, you can walk through a doorway and you're inside the refugee camp, and you can look around and see the space and hear the sound, or you can walk into the art studio and you can actually see that art where it is created. And to me, that was it. It was really important because I think that this type of platform allows people to tell us their stories. They certainly don't need me to tell their stories for them, but what I can do is create this platform that's engaging, that it's in this sort of virtual world where it's open for everybody to access. And to me, I think that that's a really interesting and exciting new area for anthropology to explore.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because there are some individuals who don't have the ability or the finances to go travel and see these different places in the world, but being able to just immerse themselves in a VR setting of being like, wow, it actually feels like I'm walking through this place and getting to see and hear all about these life stories. I think that's really cool. And I definitely think there needs to be a lot more of that for VR, for sure. Are you guys planning to do any virtual realities for the greening refugee settlements where they're creating their own gardens or anything like that?
So yeah, good question. We don't have anything lined up currently, but it would be a really good project that I think VR fits well with as well, as far as bringing people into a space where people are cultivating gardens, where people are placemaking, making their space beautiful, creating spaces for their children to play. And I think that it fits well with the idea of VR because you can create, again, an embodied experience. You can see the garden, you can walk through it, you can hear people telling their stories and about why these spaces are important. And I think that that makes it a really good candidate for VR as well. The next iteration of the project that I'm working on right now, which is sort of a add-on to the Art of Exile, is specifically related to material culture and the objects that people take with them when they cross borders. And I'm currently working to 3D scan the objects using what's called photogrammetry. And then you can place those objects into VR so that you can pick them up, you can hold them, you can examine them, and then you can hear audio of the person talking about the meaning of that object. What's the background? What's the significance? And I think this is a really good tool for preserving cultural heritage, to preserving these oral histories of movement, and then putting them sort of into this virtual repository that is accessible. So that's kind of where the project is going. That's what I'm leaning towards working on. But yeah, my prior work, I think working in urban agriculture is also an excellent candidate. There's not enough time in the day, I think, to tackle all of these projects, but I have hope.
So how long does it take to scan in an object so that it can be used in a VR setting?
So much quicker than you might imagine. So I have an app on my phone. It's called Polycam, and it's just an app that I use on an iPhone. And if you have an object, you can just place it in an area, kind of a blank space area. I'll use like a white sheet, and you literally just walk around the object with your phone, and it takes a ton of photographs, and then it creates, it's called an FBX file. But yeah, I can scan an object in under 15 minutes and have the file, and then plugging it into VR is about as quick as if I already have a gallery made, and if the space is ready, you can just kind of drop the file in. Building out a VR space takes a little bit longer, but if you have one ready to go, then it's fairly quick. But yeah, the tools that we have now are amazing. The same app that I'm using on my phone to photogrammetry also has LiDAR, so you can actually scan an entire room with your cell phone as well, which is really interesting. So I've yet to play around with that too much, but
Wow. Did this project require a lot of coding at all?
A bit, yes. So for the Art of Exile, we use the platform Unity, which is actually a gaming software. And I am not a computer engineer. I'm an anthropologist through and through all of my training. I am lucky to be married to a computer engineer. And so I got a little bit of help on that end at home with kind of figuring out some of that code. But it was absolutely let's figure this out by ourselves at home. Let's watch some YouTube videos. Let's read the tutorial and figure out how to make it work. And thankfully, there's a lot of information out there online about using these platforms. I cannot recommend Unity highly enough. We found it to be very, after you kind of get through the initial of a shock of learning how things work, it's actually pretty user friendly, and it's helpful to build out those spaces.
With all of this research that you've been doing and these projects that you're creating, does this go along with being a postdoctoral research fellow, or is it something completely different?
So good question again. The Art of Exile was a project that I created during my postdoc, and that was really made possible because I had received this fellowship from the American Council of Learned Societies, which offered us additional generous grant funding to do this type of research. And so I had received funding from the ACLS, the University of California, Irvine, their Humanities Center also had some funding. They were excited about the project, and I received an additional fellowship from Rotary International that helped facilitate some travel to Thailand and some of these other things. So cobbling together, some of those resources really made this project happen. And also having sort of the time and space to develop it as well during that postdoc. So this project, yes, specifically was related to that. Because this project really is a labor of love, of course, it will continue now that I have moved on to my teaching career. We do have a little bit of extra time, and I know the faculty in my new department is excited about the project and the work and thinking about, how we can bring something like this to our students. I'm always the professor. I've already brought VR headsets into the classroom to kind of talk about using VR's ethnographic experience. So there's going to be some opportunities as well to present and do additional research related to this topic.
And is every individual who gets a PhD, are they required to go into a postdoctoral research fellow position, or can they go into something else like a career? I don't know. I don't know what the other option would be.
No, good question. Good question. No, you're definitely not required to do a postdoc. And it's actually, postdocs are more traditionally aligned with the harder sciences. A postdoc, in the past was basically as soon as you finish your PhD, you would sort of go and work in somebody's research laboratory to gain some experience and some skills and perhaps some publications before you moved into a tenure track position. I would say it's relatively new in the humanities and social sciences to have postdocs, but it's definitely a growing area. A postdoc is a really good step between graduate school and a tenure track position because it gives you access to the faculty. A lot of time postdocs are included in things like faculty meetings, and you just get a little bit more experience about what an academic career is going to be like. And it also gives you some breathing room and some space to do research, to publish, to explore your interests, and to really think about what you want your career to be. So I feel exceptionally fortunate to be able to have had a postdoc for 2 years and to have had that space to develop this research. So no, it's not required. I highly recommend it. But yeah, you can absolutely go straight from grad school into a teaching position, or you can, of course, go to, the private sector or nonprofit world.
Gotcha. What made you want to get into this field?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I always thought that I would end up working as an applied anthropologist. My research is applied by nature. I did a master's degree in applied anthropology before I, went on to do a PhD. And so I had always envisioned myself pretty much in the working for a nonprofit, kind of working in that region, working with refugees and migrants. And I'll say what brought me to that topic at all. I started my career doing archaeology, actually, in my undergrad. And, I was working in Belize and working in Mayan archaeology, but I began volunteering for the International Rescue Committee. And this is when I was living in Dallas, Texas, which is one of the major sites of refugee resettlement in the US. And I was volunteering for the IRC simply because it was kind of in my neighborhood. And I was placed with a refugee family that had just recently been resettled in Texas from Myanmar. And so, going to their home, I was, teaching ESL. I was kind of taking this family to the grocery store and really becoming integrated in this community in Dallas. And it really made me think about refugee resettlement, how there was sort of a lack of information in my community at that time about why people, were coming to Texas from this region. And when I went on to do my PhD, I decided to continue working with that population and actually going to Myanmar, then going to the border, and then thinking about sort of these larger social problems that led to the displacement of people from Myanmar. Often, and I think a lot of anthropologists might say that it's not a linear path to academia. Of course, there's the exception. Some people just know from the beginning that this is what they want to do and they love teaching and, they're on a straight track. But for me, I did a master's and then I was working in the nonprofit world for a while until I went back to grad school. That mostly happened because there was a graduate research assistantship at my university that they were hiring for that was fully funded that would work with refugees. It was called the Forced Migration Innovation Project, and it specifically looked at career laddering, how refugees obtain living wage employment after resettlement. And so I was really interested in that project and to do research with them. And so I applied and then, received the funding and the support to go do my PhD. But yeah, it's interesting because you make these decisions along the way. When I started my PhD, I also began teaching and doing some adjuncting and found out that I really find a lot of fulfillment teaching. I love teaching students, mentoring students, and talking about different career paths. But it wasn't linear for me. I think it's sort of a confluence of circumstances that led to a career in academia. But yeah, I don't think I would trade it.
Did you feel like having a gap between like undergrad or grad school, it kind of helped you decide better on what it is that you wanted to study rather than just like jumping right into it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. For me, I found it invaluable to go and work in the nonprofit sector for a while, and to get some other experience sort of under my belt. I spent a couple years actually working in the corporate world as well. And, I always say I'm very far removed from that life now, or from the corporate world. But, I learned Excel. I learned, how to work on SAP. I learned sort of these skills that become valuable. And a lot of those skills are transferable, I think, in academia and teaching and writing, certainly, writing grant applications and those sorts of things. So I always tell my students, if they're considering grad school, that, think about it. If you want to take a year and to, get some experience or to go out in the world, you should do that, because grad school is, it's a huge commitment, both mentally, often financially, and you should be really clear about what excites you, what you want to work on, because you're going to be doing it for a long time if you start grad school. So yeah, I think that experience, at least for me, it was really, really important to my particular career path.
And that's what I'm noticing a lot of professors nowadays, like new age professors, is they're being a lot more upfront with students who are wanting to get a master's or PhD. And they're like, you really need to think about this before you get in it. Like, it can be a great experience if you're kind of prepared for it. Because I have some friends who are burning out right now in their grad school programs because they're like, all I've been doing for the past 10 years is school and I'm done with school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I absolutely mirror that. I think you do have to consider, what do you want to do with your life? What is your career? What do you want it to look like? And ask yourself, is it necessary to have a PhD for that career? A lot of times the answer might be no. It might be, a master's degree might be good enough. Sometimes it doesn't require graduate school and you could do specialized certificate study. But yeah, I think it's an interesting question, especially because of just the intense toll that it takes on people intellectually, emotionally. You're often in situations of huge amounts of stress and high workloads and feeling the pressure to, fit into academia and produce and publish and do all of these things. And then, of course, you have the lurking imposter syndrome and all of these other kind of things that rear their ugly heads when you're in grad school. So it's absolutely something to consider.
Yeah. And you mentioned grant writing. How often do you have to write a grant?
Yeah, often. Unfortunately. Yeah. So the world of grant writing, receiving funding, unfortunately, is the not very fun side of doing research, but it's necessary to get things done. The good news is that there's a lot of different outlets out there that often like to fund research. So, writing a grant for the National Science Foundation is entirely different than writing a grant for the Winter. And so, there's different organizations that also will fund research. As I mentioned, I had my postdoc through the ACLS, and thankfully that came with some research funds. So, there's ways to be creative about getting your research and your projects funded. But yeah, grant writing is definitely a piece of academia. And unfortunately, it's not one that I know that how to escape anytime soon, but kind of always there.
Are there, I guess, like classes that you would recommend someone should take if they want to learn more about grant writing or just like writing in general?
Yeah, so some universities will offer a specific grant writing course. Some I know add that as part of the required curriculum if you are doing PhD study, which I think is an excellent tool. Everybody should know at least what the basic format looks like. I would encourage if any of your listeners are in grad school and that option is not available, to go to your faculty and say, we want a workshop at least, let's run a workshop because we need to know how to put together an application for the National Science Foundation, or I need dissertation funding. This is a skill that if you enter the job market and you're looking, for an academic career, a tenure track career, it's excellent to demonstrate to faculty that you have received a grant during your graduate career, that you received dissertation funding. And if you received dissertation funding from one of these big organizations, it shows that you know how to write a grant. And everybody knows that that is a valuable skill to bring to a new department as a new hire. So yeah, if your university program doesn't offer a class specifically related to grant writing, proposal writing, you should absolutely approach your faculty and ask to have a workshop or to have some time and some funds set aside to learn that skill.
Even though I never had gotten my master's or PhD, I don't think I had a class, or I didn't see a class like that offered at my university. I mean, the most that I had was like a business writing class, and I think that was the hardest class I ever took. But English grammar is just so difficult. It's just, gives you PTSD thinking about it.
Oh, good.
Anyways.
There are some online also. I know there's some out there. Some are probably better than others. But if you look up, like nonprofit grant writing, usually you can do like a weekend workshop or something for like $150. But yeah, if you're in school, I would ask your faculty first because they should have development funds that will help make that a reality. But yeah, it's not one of these subjects people are like, sign me up for grant writing. So fun.
I agree. I'd rather take like a Rituals of Humans Remains class over a grant writing class.
Absolutely. Necessary evil, unfortunately, but yeah.
Definitely. So has obtaining an anthropology degree kind of broadened your view on the world and added like value to your job?
I mean, yes, 100% yes. I have always said, I'm an anthropologist through and through. I did my undergrad in anthropology. I did a master's in applied anthropology. I did my PhD in anthropology. So, I absolutely believe in the value of learning about, other cultures and thinking about spreading that information. To me, it's been really insightful to work, especially with incoming students. I love working with freshman students and teaching this intro to anthropology course that I think everybody teaches at some point if you're starting your career in academia and anthropology. But I love the intro classes because I can introduce students to these topics or ideas or theories that perhaps they hadn't been exposed to before. And to me, I think that's really exciting. But I also think it's exciting that we have the potential to change this field in relation to the current moment, because anthropology is not what it was, of course, in the past. And it's really not even what it was 20 years ago. The world is shifting and changing, and we need to think about positionality and representation and, the way that we conduct our research and put it out into the world and think about ethical practice. And so I think that those things are important and valuable. And as I said, I will always be an anthropologist, but I'm excited to think about how the discipline can evolve and change and react to a changing world.
Every time I have to describe what anthropology is to some of my family members, the best way I can put it is anthropology isn't so much a job, it's a mindset and a skill set that you have. Because
I should steal that. That's good.
You could basically apply it to everything in every field, because it's very rare that you're going to find a job where it just says anthropologist on it. But it's a mindset that you come into and bring into your job, and you're going to work with people no matter what. So you have to be able to like respect everyone's traditions and their cultures and the way their mindsets and all that kind of stuff. So I definitely think it helps bring people together more than it does tear people apart.
I completely agree. I have a friend who's a medical anthropologist, and she has often said, all policy is health policy, as this sort of, comment about how intersectional anthropology is and how it, as you were just mentioning, how it layers into all of these different areas of our lives. And I think that that's a really good way to sort of sum it up, that everything is anthropology, right? We can see these intersections of society and culture into every aspect of our lives, which I find really, it's sometimes big and daunting, and it's equally as exciting. So yeah, I think that explaining what anthropology is, other than the fact that it's often confused with the subsection of archaeology, which I find myself explaining more often, the difference between archaeology and anthropology, and talking about the four fields and sort of the umbrella. Yeah, I think you've summed it up well. We think about, just the intersection of culture in our life. It's the study of human beings and everything that entails. Of course, it's big.
Yep. Definitely, because we think about past, present, and future. Where is the human race going? How can we learn from our past mistakes with all like this research and the culture, and that we're always evolving, and hopefully we are evolving for the better.
Hopefully.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the hope. But anyways, before we get to our final 4 questions, is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you would like to let the listeners know about?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I think I talked a little bit about kind of the value of doing field work and the value of thinking about like embodied experience. The one thing that I did want to say, as I was talking a little bit about my project work and kind of this idea of multimodal ethnography, I was explaining my project to you a bit, and I was talking about how, how we created this platform in virtual reality. And I wanted to talk about why I thought that was important, specifically related to multimodal ethnography, specifically as that relates to what's been termed as the digital divide. I don't know if you've heard this term before, but it's the idea that there's a divide between who has access to technology and who doesn't. And, kind of thinking about the implications of that, creating a project that you can only essentially view as it was meant to be viewed on a headset that brand new might run you 300, US dollars, which isn't prohibitively expensive, but it's certainly more expensive than perhaps a lot of the participants are able to afford. As a very specific aspect of the project that I was working on, I went last summer and delivered VR headsets to everybody that participated. So I went to the refugee camp and gifted a headset, sent one to Bangladesh, and made sure that people could view the gallery on the technology that it was intended to see it on. But it's a huge problem. I have one sort of small project and I was able to do that. But as we're thinking about using technology and, using LiDAR and scanning objects, we have to think about how can we make these things accessible also for people everywhere. And I think that this is a question that we have to incorporate into our research designs. I am interested in multimodal ethnography and using VR because I feel that practice is ethical in nature, and that I'm providing platforms for people to tell their own stories. And I think along with that ethical practice is this consideration of where technology falls as far as who has access to it and who doesn't. So I would really encourage people that are interested in multimodal ethnography to think about those things also, to think about the digital divide, to think about dissemination. How can I make sure that this project that I'm working on can be seen by the participants? How can they participate also in combining and adding to these narrative outputs? So yeah, to answer your question, I think that's something I just want to make sure that we discussed, because I find it to be probably one of the most important aspects of doing this type of research.
Right. And do you think that's something that you'd ever be able to get into like museums? Because I know some museums, they'll have like a small fee to get in, or they'll have days where it's like free entry. And having that kind of project as one of the exhibits, would allow a wider range of individuals with all different kinds of financial backgrounds to be able to experience what you created as part of an exhibit.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. This summer in Bangkok, I actually was able to have the Art of Exile on display for 3 weeks at the Bangkok Arts and Cultural Center inside the Southeast Asia Junction space. And so that was free, that anybody could go and wear the headset and see the Art of Exile. And that was before the headset got sent over to Bangladesh. So that was great. And so, yes, absolutely. We should be able to build spaces where people can go and see the work and interact with these exhibits for free. But also, the beauty of doing digital ethnography is that you can put it online. And most people have access to a smartphone, a cell phone with VR specifically. You can also create VR galleries that are viewable in what's called Google Glass, or they're like cardboard VR viewers that you can just use with a smartphone. And so that's one way that people would be able to access it. And the technology is quite clever that you can navigate by retinal scanning. So what you do is you stare down the hallway and then you blink your eyes slowly and that moves you forward. So you can do navigation kind of in that way. And so these are really interesting avenues for us to explore. The Art of Exile is also now part of the permanent collection at the UC Irvine Intercultural Communication Lab. So we have that on permanent display. So any professor or any class can come and check it out. And that really is built. That's made possible because I was able to receive funding to develop this. And for me, again, I really think that it's part of ethical practice to make that as open and free and available to anybody that wants to experience it. Hopefully, with any luck, it will be available as a free download on the Oculus app by the end of this year. And so you would just be able to search that out and then be able to view it if you have access to a headset.
Cool. I'm definitely going to have to check it out since I have my own set.
I'll send you a link also. Yeah.
That'll be great. Yeah, we haven't picked it up in a while. It's been sitting on the shelf because, you can only play Beat Saber so many times before it gets boring. But yeah, that's definitely something really cool that I would love to check out. And you said it'll come out sometime at the end of 2024?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, anyways, so getting to our final 4 questions, what is the best piece of advice you would offer to someone who's interested in getting into the academic side of anthropology?
Sure. So if somebody is interested in a career in academia, the best piece of advice I would say, if you're thinking about graduate school, is that find a professor, find an advisor whose work you admire, who you want to work with, and see if you can get a position in that department, if you can, work under them, learn from them. And don't be afraid to send out an email. Professors actually love to receive your emails. If you've read an article of theirs that they really like, reach out, have that conversation. The worst that can happen is somebody, says no or doesn't reply to you. So I would encourage you to reach out to people whose work that you have especially enjoyed or feel connected to. Find a graduate program that aligns well with your interests, and really try to place yourself somewhere that you can see yourself being happy and having success. And that goes to our geographical area as well. So, it might feel like a good plan, but if you're moving to a part of the country where you are going to be miserable and your mental health is going to suffer, it's not worth it. So you have to find a good, balance between those two things because both are equally as important.
Amazing. Yes, I agree. What changes would you like to see within either the academic world or the technology world with VR and stuff?
Well, I think in academia, what I would love to see is a bigger recognition of the value of creating outputs like VR, like multimodal ethnography, film, things that are outside of the traditional realm of just publishing, just writing. So I think if the field could evolve to sort of recognize the value of the labor that it takes to create these things, I think that would really be a positive step forward for our discipline. At the moment, writing a monograph, publishing in peer-reviewed articles, this is sort of the golden standard to show your expertise on a topic and to show your stamina as an academic. And I think that those things are great and certainly valuable, but I would love to see more recognition of projects that are outside of that very traditional scope of academic work to also receive the recognition that they deserve.
Yeah, I think that would be great because I feel like it adds a lot more accessibility to individuals who aren't in academia. Because if you're not someone who reads academic papers every day, sometimes it can be hard to get through because of the jargon, and it's, especially if it's not in a field that you quite understand. So you might not be as wanting to read something like that, even if it's something that sounds like super interesting. Whereas now these days, because everybody's so in technology, it's like, sure, I'll watch like a 15-minute video on what this person is studying rather than reading like a 20, 30-page paper and trying to decipher what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a different skill set also, right? It's a skill you develop to be able to create that video or to show somebody what you're working on. And I think that skill is just as valuable.
Yeah. And my favorite question, what do you absolutely just love about your job?
Well, I love to have the academic and intellectual freedom to explore topics that I think are important and valuable. Having some time and space to work on these, it's an immense privilege. And I really, really value that space to explore those areas. And part two of that is I really, really do enjoy and love teaching. I love working with students, thinking about how their interests and career goals might intersect with anthropology. It's really satisfying if you have a student from a different discipline and you kind of pull them over to the anthropology side. Yeah. And so I love both aspects of that for sure.
That's awesome. And finally, where can listeners learn more about you and the work that you do?
Sure. Well, you can look up The Art of Exile on the Oculus app. You can also Google that, and there should be a link to the project. And there's a video of an invited panel that we had about the exhibition. So that's online as well. Or I'll be happy to drop my email address for your listeners as well. And if anybody wants to chat, you can do that also.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'll have all that linked in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in checking out The Art of Exile or wants to reach out to Carrie with any questions that they have about the field or anything like that, that'd be amazing. But thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk about this with me.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Anthropuzzled. This show was produced by me. A special thanks to Cheyenne Brewer for editing the website and episode descriptions, and to Leah Akers for the incredible logo design. The music is courtesy of Chad Crouch, aka Poddington Bear of Sound of Picture. If you have any questions, you can reach me at abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com. That's abby.letsinger@anthropuzzled.com. Or as Anthropuzzled on Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, or YouTube. Until next time.